Greetings, Diocese of Oklahoma. I am so glad to get to spend some time with you. First, let me share the greetings that are being sent to you from the Diocese of Newark, from the people and clergy and staff that are also excited that we are spending some time together in this way. I'm also excited because your bishop and I have been talking about this since before his consecration. Before we got thrown fully into the event that has become worldwide pandemic. And it has taken us a while to figure out how to make it happen. And I am so glad to be with you in any way that I can. There's a third reason I'm also excited to spend some time with you, and it is because I am an Oklahoman. I was born in Tulsa and lived there for 5 years before my family moved to Texas. But most of my summers were spent in Tulsa visiting my grandmother. And it feels absolutely lovely to get to spend some time in what was my home diocese. I started out there. So I am happy also that you have been spending some time looking at Esther, particularly in that 4th chapter. We have much in common. That's part of why folks in the Diocese of Newark were excited to know what I would be talking about with you. We have a little bit of an inside joke here that we spent some time looking at Esther with the clergy in October of 2019, and that was a way of helping us to really own the sense of call of who we were to be leading a church that was in severe decline and wondering what we could do about that. That was the start of our looking at our sense of call with the help of Esther. And then we say that Esther knocked on our door in October of 2019. She burst through the door in March and has taken up residence in our diocese ever since, as it's become important to us to understand not only the sense of call that clergy have, but the sense of call that every single person of God has. And that's what I want to talk with you today, about that sense of call. How Esther's call, how your call, how my call, how our call transforms the world. I want to start with 3 things that I'll talk about in some form altogether, but I want to start with them and end with them. 1, the simple fact is, you are called. You and me, all of us, we are called, not just the ordained people, not just the people serving in a paid position in a church, not just the people working for religious organizations, but every single person of God is called. So first, you are called. Second, every minute, every bit of ministry matters. Every part of ministry matters. Every moment of ministry matters right now. Every single thing we say or do has an impact right now. Every moment of ministry matters. You are called. Every moment of ministry matters. And then the third thing I would add happens because of the first 2. Because we are called and because every moment of our ministry matters, God works through us in our calling, in our ministry. God works through us and the world is transformed. So God's doing the work of transformation. But we could go so far as to say, we are called. Every minute of our ministry matters, and we are transforming the world. That is what is happening right now in this world that we live in. Wherever you are today, however you're watching, if you're watching from home, if you're watching by yourself, if you're watching with family or friends, if you're in a church, in a parish hall gathered to watch together, or if you're watching completely online with a group of friends in a watch party, wherever you are and whoever you are, important for you to know that you are called. That God created you to be a unique and specific person and gave you particular gifts that can be used only by you in the way that you would use them, and you are called to use those gifts. We do a disservice to ourselves. We do a disservice to the church. We do a disservice to God's calling when we use those words only to talk about ordained ministry. And that is a fault line in our church. We have a tendency to do that. I talk to more good people with strong callings that think that because they're called to do some ministry that's beyond their church or in the world, and they think that the way to make that legitimate is to become a priest or become a deacon. Meanwhile, they're already doing a fantastic ministry because they are called and they're living fully into that ministry. One of my fondest hopes is that we would figure this out in the Episcopal Church. Find a way to help people with discernment as they come out of high school, help people with discernment when they're in college, help people with discernment when they leave college, help people with discernment when they hit middle age or they've done maybe 7-10 years at work and they're wondering what is next. Let's remove discernment from only talking about how we form priests or form people for ordained ministry, and recognize the fact that every single person has a calling, and sometimes people need help with discernment. That's what we see in Esther. We love that passage. We love Esther 4:14. Maybe you were called to royalty just for a time such as this. Every single one of us needs to hear words like this. Maybe you were called to be a parent just for a time such as this. Maybe you're called to be a teacher or a nurse just for such a time as this. Maybe you're called to be a member of that social organization just for a time such as this. Maybe you are called to reach out across a racial divide just for such a time as this. Maybe you're called to be a neighbor just for such a time as this. We understand that call, and why as church we limit it to ordained people is beyond me, and it no longer serves us. So let's do something different. Let's just decide we're going to do that. Here's the thing. It would be great if every church could put a program in place right away, but Esther didn't need a church. She needed a loving member of her community. It was her uncle, Mordechai, who saw and knew that she had the ability to live into that particular calling of talking to the king. He knew she had what it took. Now, if he had not ever named it for her, we would not know Esther's name. That group of Jews would have been wiped off the face of the earth. They may not even be a footnote in history. We may not have even known that they exist. There wouldn't be a book of Esther in the canon. It wouldn't be a part of the Bible. Part of the reason all of those things happened is someone in Esther's community took a look at her and took a look at the situation and says, I think you might be the one. I think that you're the one who can do something about this. You know, I think we have in our head this fantasy that happens for every student at some point in school, and it happens for some. But I think in our fantasy that happens one time and a person is able to fuel a lifetime on that one conversation. And maybe there are some people who are able to fuel a lifetime on that one conversation. But most of us need more support than that. Most of us really do need the feedback of the community. Most of us need the input and the nurture of the community. Most of us can't see what the rest of the community around us can see. I am a prime example. Someone else had to say to me, have you ever thought about being ordained? It simply never crossed my mind. It was the community that identified my gifts for me and said, hey, I think that you could do this. We can do that same thing for each other. We can do that with any person that is in our community. I think we try naturally to do it with our children, but we can certainly do it with each other. We can do it with our friends. We can do it with our spouses. We can do it with our loved ones. We can do it in our Bible studies. We can do it in our small groups. Imagine the change to coffee hour conversation if we spent time talking about what we thought each other could do. Gosh, that would be some deep and meaningful conversation. There is no coincidence about the way God created us. There is no coincidence about the gifts that God has given us to use. There is no coincidence about the calling that God has for each of us. It's simply a matter of our being able to live into that call, which is why I think Esther 4:14 resonates so deeply within us. We see her rise to the occasion. And I think in some part, each of us, we know we have a call. We're not quite sure what it is sometimes. But I think when we see Esther rise to the occasion, we hope for ourselves that we would rise to the occasion. We hope for ourselves that we might be like her. We are called. And sometimes we need the help of each other to remember that we are called. Her ministry mattered from the very first minute. Once she heard that calling, she moved. She immediately got going. Her response to Mordechai, after hearing what her call was to be, her response to Mordecai was, I need the help of the community. She asked him to tell people to pray and fast for 3 days, that she too would pray and fast for 3 days. And then after everybody prayed and fasted for 3 days, she would go into the king's court. And if she died, so be it. But she was going to go and do her best, but she wanted the support of the community before she went. Now, here's something else that is so different for us. This moment of stopping before ministry happens to prepare spiritually for ministry. So often for us, once we decide it's time for a ministry, it's time to form the committee. We go straight to forming that committee and straight into action. But this moment of pulling back first and saying, let's put ourselves before God and ask for God's help in this before we start doing anything. That is a completely different way of working for us as typical Americans. We are prone to act first and then we can discuss it afterwards. But the whole thought of pausing to pray first. Think about this for a second. Imagine your finance chair standing before the congregation saying, the finance committee is going to start working on the budget, but before we start working on the budget, we're going to ask the community to pray and fast this week. Pray and fast that we are able to make good decisions that move our ministry forward. We ask you to do that. Imagine the stewardship chair saying, we are going to ask the congregation to pray and fast for 3 days before we launch the pledge campaign, before we launch the capital campaign. Imagine before we pull committees together, that we gather together to pray and fast first. to put ourselves in the presence of God first. It does two things. First of all, it helps us to remember to get the involvement of the heavenly country, to ask for God and for God's help in things. It's important for us to ask for that and give God the room to work with us. But two, it's as important that we know the community is upholding us in prayer. Think about the number of times when people have prayed for you and you have just known someone is praying for you. When you're in the middle of discerning, in the middle of starting a new ministry, in the middle of trying on anything new that means stepping out in courage, the way Esther stepped out in courage, the only thing that she would have lost would have been her life, stepped fully out into courage, knowing that the community had been holding her in prayer. That gives you a level of confidence that is beyond what you can put on yourself. It's a level of confidence that comes because the Spirit of God is with you in response to all of those prayers of other people. We see Esther do this. And I wonder what would happen if we did the same. It would feel very different than jumping in feet first. But I wonder how it might change our ministries if we went forward knowing that we had stopped for prayer. What would the discussion look like at the start of a ministry if that ministry began because it had been so well supported by praying people? How might that impact the ministry, the life of the ministry, and certainly the leadership of the ministry? I'm also really aware that Esther had asked for the prayers of the community, and the one thing that she needed to do was to go in, stand before the king, stay alive, to ask for her question. What is it that she wanted? The king asked her what she wanted, and she said, I want you to have dinner at my house tomorrow. She didn't ask for what she wanted. Somehow she knew it was important to have him on her own territory, on her turf, where she might have even more confidence. And then she continued to ask him after he came for dinner that next night. She continued to ask him for what she needed. Safety for people like her, safety for all people like her, justice for people like her. She kept asking, not only until it saved those people, but until there was a law in place that protected the Jews for generations to come. They called it Esthers Law, and a holiday, Purim, still celebrated today, began because of that law. She could not have known when she asked those people to pray just how many places her ministry would have led her along the way. We can't know where our ministries will be led to, but those prayers are so important to the beginning of our ministries. Every single moment of them counts. The little ones where we just ask for prayer, and the big ones when we stand up with courage and we ask not only for our own safety, but for the safety of others. I have a feeling that's going to be something we're asking for quite a lot in the coming months and years. It's going to take courage to do, and I would suggest before we start doing, that we start praying and get ourselves well covered and well supported in prayer before we begin those things. Here is the thing. These two things come together. We are called. Every minute of that ministry matters, just like it did to Esther, called just the way Esther was. And God working through us changes the world. I go so far as to say we're transforming the world. But please know when I say that, we're transforming the world because God's doing the work with us. God lets nothing go to waste. Even the moments of ministry to us that feel like a failure, God is able to take that and bring something good from it. God is able to work with all sorts of situations and people, reframing them, reshaping them, turning them into something good and useful and needed and necessary and whole. When we can accept our call and live into our call and step fully into our ministry, knowing that all of it matters, the big, the small, the little, the in-between, that all of it matters. That when we do that, we leave all of this space for God to make changes in us, around us, and through us. COVID has been a game changer for all of us, not just in this country, but across the world, not just in our denomination or in our faith tradition, but in all faith traditions, including those that have no faith tradition. It has been a complete game changer. In our denomination, it has forced us to do things that we did not think we can do. Suddenly, we are online. How many conversations did we have across the years about why we couldn't stream? That hymns needed to be protected and copyright laws, and we don't have the equipment, and how are we going to make this happen? Most of us had 24 hours notice. Some places had 48 hours notice. Most of us had very little notice, and we were online the next day and have been for 8.5 months. COVID forced us online. It forced us to change our relationships with our buildings. Sometimes I think as Episcopalians, we almost cannot help ourselves. We worship Jesus and we worship that building at the same time. It is an idol for us. And it's a hard idol for us to even wrap our brain around, that we are worshiping a building instead of God from time to time, and that much of our ministry is devoted to taking care of buildings. And it's hard to find Jesus talking about buildings when we look at the Gospels. So there's a part of us that knows our ministry has already been diluted by that. And this forced us out of our buildings, forced us to really rethink that and reimagine what it means to be church, to recognize that it's the people of God that are the church. It's not the building that's the church. It's not the institution that's the church. It's not convention that's the church. All of those things support what is the church. And the church is the people of God. The church is the people of God serving God's people wherever they are needed, wherever they can be found. Everything else, the building, the institution, convention, the committees, the meetings, the wardens, the vestry, all of those other things are in place to support the people of God in their calling to serve in ministry beyond the doors of the church to all of God's people wherever they can be found. COVID has also given us some opportunities for ministry. It's not just forced us to do some things. It has given us the opportunity to rethink and reimagine who we want to be and who God is calling us to be right now. To spend some time asking us, what does church look like now? What is it that God needs church to be going forward? It has opened the door for evangelism for us. Suddenly, people who could never talk about their faith are online talking about their faith, sharing with people about prayer groups and about morning prayer and Compline, and here's where you can go to this service or that service. And all of our online sharing is wide open. People can see it. So people have been discovering the Episcopal Church through our posting online. Suddenly, it's not just that we're evangelists. We're digital evangelists. I never thought I would see the day. It is a beautiful thing in the midst of trying circumstances. It's also given us the opportunity to do serious work around systemic racism and white supremacy, something that our church has been talking about for decades, but has yet to really dig deep and figure out who we want to be. Is our goal to continue to be a predominantly white denomination in a country that is quickly becoming majority people of various colors? Is that who we want to be? If that is who we want to be, we should carry on doing exactly what we want to do. But if it's not who we want to be, then we need to do some work around systemic racism. Every parish should know its racial history. Every parish has one. But it's a matter of asking those questions and finding out how did we come into being, who was displaced, who was not allowed to come because of where we are and the way we do church. To spend time thinking about those things and ask, is that who we are called to be at this time? There is so much ministry for us right now. It has been an extremely difficult time, a hard time, full of grief, full of consternation and volatility. And at the same time, God has been blessing us, showing us how to serve others, how to love our neighbor at this time. I encourage you to stick with Esther, and I've asked my folks, read the whole book. Read it as often as you can. Keep going back to it. Dig down deep. Go back before chapter 4. Go beyond chapter 4. Let Esther keep speaking to you. Let her remind you that you are called, that every moment of your ministry matters, and that you are transforming the world. It is the God in you that is allowing those things to happen. Bless you, diocese. Bless you, bishop. I look forward to the day when we can see each other face to face. Amen.